In the middle of the 16th century, German-speaking parts of Europe were organized under the Holy Roman Empire. Small city-states and provinces, ruled by aristocrats, were under the control of Charles V and the Roman Catholic Church. Feudalism was declining, and an idea of mutual trust and shared responsibilities between princes and peasants had formed. However, princes wanted to establish superiority, so peasants were still treated unfairly or became victims of economic distress. They rebelled against their lords in what is known as the Peasants' War, a revolt of agrarian peasants from southern and central Germany against their rulers in 1524-25. The causes of the revolt were diverse, although a main one was economic distress. Because of the military needs and government costs, taxes had increased regardless of the condition of the poorer classes. Furthermore, with the decrease in the value of money, prices rose but wages didn't. Secondly, peasants were being treated unfairly by their rulers and living conditions were getting worse gradually. Lords extended their authority and the workloads and services of the serfs and even took away some of their rights, standing, and power. Finally, peasants were influenced by the Protestant Reformation, which means that Martin Luther is sometimes regarded as the true instigator of the rebellions. All of these factors led to peasants seeking change. They expressed their need for that change through their revolt. During the period between 1492 and 1500, sporadic rebellions had broken out in Olgo, Alsace, and the Dioclese of Speyer, and others, but they had all been quickly betrayed and suppressed. The revolt that marked the Peasants' War began in Stulingen, in the southern part of the German Black Forest, under the guidance of Hans Müller of Bogenbach. And as the power of rebels grew, it spread over Swabia, Franconia, and Alsace. But except for the periodic capture of supplies and cannons, the beginning of the revolt featured rare violent attacks. However, soon that peace turned into violence. Large-scale battles started breaking out following the murder of a count on the 16th of April 1525. Princes had the support of hired mercenaries and their armies, while the peasants were mostly untrained and poorly armed. However, because of the support of people like Hildrich Zwingli and Thomas Müntzer, by May of that same year, peasants were victorious in many places, so concessions to some of their demands had to be made. By the way, what were those demands? They were all summarized in a list with an uncertain author referred to as the 12 Articles. These demands were related to economy, religion, and society. Their aim was for the empire to gain strength, while the territorial princes to be weaker. For example, some of the articles concerned changes in tithing and ending serfdom. However, not everybody was convinced of their benefit. One of the popular critics was Martin Luther himself, though he had very mixed feelings on the subject. First, he thought that the peasants were responsible for farming of the land and rulers for keeping the peace. Then he encouraged the violent reaction of the rulers and condemned the rebels. And then after the war he again changed his mind and criticized the ruling classes for the oppression of the peasants. But despite his stance on the issue, he did inspire one of the leading reformers in the revolts, Thomas Müntzer, a preacher and theologian who, after joining the rebels in early 1525, helped them shape their demands. He started his revolt as a follower of Luther's doctrines, but soon went his own way and is today regarded as a significant force in the social history of modern Europe. His support and that of others led to the height of the revolts. The rebels had become an organized force with a board of peasants. They started to think bigger. They planned to reorganize the entire constitution, while property of the church was to be secularized for the feudal lords who had joined them. The beginning, however, of the end was the Battle of Frankenhausen on May 15th, in which Münzer's hordes were defeated by the princes of Saxony, Brunswick, Hesse, and Mansfeld. More than 5,000 peasants were killed, and leading rebels were captured and executed. Müntzer himself was taken prisoner, tortured, and finally tried and executed on May 27th at the Prince's camp in Mulhausen. And that defeat, it directly contributed to the end of the rebellion. Around the same time, the uprising in southern Germany was already subdued. On May 17th, peasants in Alsace were conquered, followed by the mobs of Odenwald and Rothenburg between June 2nd and 4th. Rebels in Würzburg had to surrender on June 7th. More time was needed for the overthrow of peasants in around Rhine, while the northwest and the east were freed from the insurrection at the time because peasants there were treated more fairly. So what were the consequences of that war? Out of the around 300,000 people that participated, 1/3 died. Almost none of the demands were met, only in some exceptional cases reforms were introduced. Some laws even became more severe. New laws oppressed more unconventional forms of religious change, so that slowed the progress of the Protestant Reformation. However, the conditions of the peasants did not worsen greatly as is assumed. But they didn't improve much either because both sides had learned from the terror of the wars.